afternoon and welcome to DCA committee. All members are here. I understand some members of the public are still coming in, so they'll probably come in and take their seats over the next 10 minutes, if that's okay. We just have 3 brief housekeeping rules. Firstly, if you've got a mobile, please turn it off or put it on silent, please. Secondly, the toilets, if you need them, are either side of the main entrance. Thirdly, no fire alarm is planned, so if it happens, it will be the real thing, in which case, go down the ramp to the right of the entrance and assemble at the Cathedral Piazza, where that's the correct place to actually meet. Could I say, Councillor Hume, Philippa, it's very good to see you back. I'm glad, hope you've recovered fully from COVID, of course. I would just like to address the batting order today. We originally had 3 very meaty and potentially controversial applications. The third one, Plot 1 Bedminster Greens, has been deferred at the applicant's request, so that will come probably in June, I guess. So it means this afternoon should be shorter, but it will still be a fairly demanding meeting. And not usual, I've agreed that there will be a 20-minute adjournment between the 2 items. So when we conclude the first one, Baltic Wharf, I'll then invite members to actually have a comfort break or disappear. But please, please come back when you're required, because even if you miss 5 seconds, public forum, as you're aware, you can't vote or speak on that item. That's fine. I just would like to make a personal point, really. Normally, this would be more appropriate under matters under any other business later on, but I suspect we'll be fairly tired by then, so I'm saying it now. This is not only the last meeting of the civic year, it's the last meeting of this council term before next Thursday's elections. So I just wanted to thank members, not only those present, but those who have served on before, for example, Councillor Pearce, Councillor Goggins and Councillor Powden for their insightful contributions. I've always, apart from the time I served on the Cabinet, I've always served on DC committees. I have to say, personally, I think that it's the most effective, the most interesting committee on the council. And in my view, no other committee can somebody just pose a question or make a point and it completely changes how you think about an application. So thank you. I've enjoyed chairing this for the last 3 years, but I could only have done it with the collective contribution of all members. Could I also thank Simone, her predecessor, Gary Collins, and the hard-working team, because without them, we couldn't be here, of course. Lastly, can I just say, I'm aware for some members it will definitely be their last council meeting. Chris, Philippa, and Philippa Farah, who's not here, and also Thomas stepping down and retiring after devoted service. So again, can I thank you very much and also wish you the best for the future. We're also losing, for a different reason, Andrew Varney, who, subject to the will of the electorate, could well become the next Lord Mayor, but I hope in due course he comes back to DC committees. Finally, could I say, I've probably known Chris Jackson more than most members for longer. It's been a pleasure, Chris. Clearly, unlike me, you've got the needs to actually sport a short throughout the year, so well done. So
thank you very much for that. And it's been a pleasure. I have enjoyed this committee.
Thank you.
Thank you.
So I'll move on to item 2, apologies, Steve.
Yeah, apologies from Councillor Hussain, substituted by Councillor Rippington.
Welcome, Tim. Declarations of interest free is not really a declaration of interest, but I made quite trenchant comments several years ago about needing or wanting a Bristol city centre caravan park. So that's on the record. In my view, that was where we are now. I'm approaching the application for Baltic Wharf purely on its merits, so I don't think I have any conflict of interest. Chris?
I forgot to say, I am actually a member of the Caravan and Motorhome Club, which that is a site.
Yep. Anyone else? No. So we'll move on to the minutes of the last meeting. Item 4, can I move those as a true and accurate copy? Can I have a second? Andrew, thank you. The action sheet is just for noting item 5. Item 6, appeals. Simone, do you want to say anything?
No, nothing further to add. I mean, I haven't been informed of any questions around appeals, so...
Tom?
Thanks. I just had a question about the sort of proportion of appeals we're getting as non-determination. How are they stacking up? You know, are they starting to tail off now, or are things still, going in the wrong direction?
Without wanting to jinx things, but fingers crossed, I think they are maybe starting to tail off, but I think what we are still seeing a high volume of appeals, including more on refusals as well, and I think this is simply a matter of numbers as well, because we've churned out so many more decisions, then proportionately the appeal rate will have gone up as well. But what I'm really pleased about is actually our rate of defending them is actually really holding up well as well. And again, touch wood, I don't want to jinx anything, but I'm quietly optimistic.
Are there any more questions? No. So we move to enforcement item 7, which on C is notably blank. I'm sure the chief planner knows my attitude. I look forward to seeing it chock-a-block with enforcement notices in June. So we move to item 8, public forum. The practice in this committee is to deal with public forum directly in front of every relevant item. So we're dealing with Baltic Wharf first. All 67 applications received submissions have been electronically sent to members for them to read. So the people who've indicated they want to speak and summarise them are about 20 people. I'll call your names, less, I think 12 for the first item, in order. Then if you could indicate where you're sitting, my colleague Oliver will bring you one mic. It should be switched on, so you don't need to adjust it. Just speak to us. But could I urge you to recall, we have a full copy of your public statement, so you've only got 1 minute just to actually summarise that. To my left, there are some traffic lights. So green, obviously, I think after 45 seconds, the amber shows, then red after 1 minute. So we will deal with the Baltic Wharf ones first. The first person I have is Anne
If Baltic Wharf is approved at this meeting, it will be the first time that a development in the highest flood risk zone, without any means of escape for residents or access for emergency services during a flood, has ever been approved in Bristol. This precedent will seriously undermine flood safety, as it will be virtually impossible to refuse permission for any other such dangerous site in future. Members should be reminded that flooding kills more people worldwide than any form of natural disaster. And in this case, flooding will involve very fast-moving water, travelling up to 20 miles per hour. The flooding that residents would be expected to endure as a hazard rating of danger for all, meaning a risk of death for residents and emergency services. The people of Bristol are relying on this committee to safeguard current and future generations of Bristolians in the face of corporate and political interests.
Thank you, and that was picture perfect, or time perfect, of course. Jill Tarleton.
Do you want to protect biodiversity? Do you think trees are important in making our cities livable? Do you think affordable homes should be genuinely affordable? Do you care about keeping Bristolians safe during extreme flood events? Do you support building on genuine brownfield sites? Do you think children should be provided with adequate play provision? If so, you should not vote for this development. With all of its faults, why is this being pushed through? Baltic Wharf is a Trojan horse for other high flood risk areas. By creating a precedent dismissing the statutory flood protections, the proposal will remove the last barrier to other flood-prone developments such as Western Harbour. To approve this development today will have widespread consequences, jeopardising the safety and well-being of Bristolians for decades to come.
Thank you, Jill. Professor Tarleton, please. John, are you there?
I think she had two to read out.
Oh, sorry.
Thank you. The Planning Officer's report fails to mention nearly 600 objections to this development. This site is not brownfield, according to NPPF definition. The site has nearly a quarter of all harbourside trees. There are very few places to plant the 162 replacement trees. The financial viability report shows there can be no affordable housing without a speculative grant, or that 80% market rent in this area is not affordable. It fails the sequential test, as the nearby SS Great Britain car park is lower flood risk and is available. In fact, Gorham Homes have already appointed architects. When flooded, the site is surrounded by deeper water, which will deny escape for residents and access for emergency services. And the Environment Agency withdrew their flooding objection only when
can you bring it to a close, please?
Only when the developers agreed to help fund their flood defences, which is at least 15 years away. Thank you.
Mark Ashdown, please. Sorry, I'm a bit confused. I thought your wife was actually presenting yours. No?
No, I had two statements as well.
Oh, well, yeah.
Sorry about that. Okay, thank you, Chair. This is our last chance to save this important site with 102 mature trees and nearly 40% tree cover and representing a quarter of all trees on the harbour side. The development would remove 82 mature trees with few, if any, sites for the required 162 replacement trees, even though policy requires that locations must be identified through the planning process. You should be in no doubt the required replacement trees will not be planted, and this is contrary to BCS 9 and DM 17. Rather than building inappropriate high-rise flats which few can afford, even at 80% market rent, this valuable woodland site could easily be transformed into a park and play area for the benefit of the community, enhancing the area as a place to live and visit. This is the sort of vision we would like to see from our council. On the other hand, if the committee continues to undervalue the environment by disregarding its own policies, Central Bristol will be entirely devoid of trees to the detriment of us all.
Right. John, do you want to do your second one now?
Yeah, I'll do my second one now, thank you. Okay, planning policy in relation to flooding requires the development will be safe for its lifetime. Access routes should allow occupants to safely access and exit, with vehicular access to allow the emergency services to safely reach the development. The latest flood assessment concedes that access and escape from the development will not be possible for over 1.5 hours, in itself unlawful. However, as the site is entirely surrounded by deeper channels, emergency services will not have access for perhaps hours, putting residents and rescue services in mortal danger. This development also fails the sequential test, which states development should not be permitted if there are reasonably available sites in areas of lower risk of flooding. Nearby, the SS Great Britain car park has lower flood risk and is available for development. In fact, it is listed on Goreham's website, and they have already appointed architects. Failing both sequential and exception tests to permit this development would be both dangerous and unlawful. Thank you.
Okay. And Mark Ashdown, please.
Unfortunately, your chair has rejected our carefully crafted request to postpone this meeting. We have set before you why this application is not ready. We have also offered arguments why proceeding today would be in breach of the Local Government Act 1972, citing both statute and case law in support. The late publication of the Park Services comments yesterday only serves to reinforce our case that too many issues remain unresolved. If the chair will not listen, then we urge the committee to. Please ignore the legacy ambitions of this dying administration. Please set aside your own short-term aspirations for next week's election. The applicant, in effect this council, refuses to comply with this declaration of an ecological emergency and achieve at least 10% biodiversity gain. It agrees instead only to comply with the bare minimum required by the MPPF, now superseded, just better than zero gain.
Mark, could you bring it to an end, please? Peter Harridge, please.
I live at 37 Westbrook Court, which borders directly onto the Caravan site. And for 32 years, I've had a quiet, sunny, secluded garden. And in fact, I chose the house for that reason. If this goes ahead, there'll be 80 windows looking straight down on my house and garden. The house and garden will be thrown into shade for most of the day throughout the year. This affects 16 households, and 26 in total suffer a loss of light. Now, the council is the developer, the landowner, and the planning authority. And my question is, who's looking out for the interests of me and the other 26 householders? Because I feel sold down the river. You talk about social housing. This is anti-social housing because it affects people who've lived there. I've been there 32 years. And, you know, if this goes ahead, I'm just going to leave Bristol after 40 years of working here. And I'd also add that I volunteer for All Aboard, and I've taken children sailing and access dinghies, because this is a designated water sports.
Sorry, can I bring it to an end?
Well, I think it will cast a wind shadow, which makes...
Sorry, everyone's only got a minute, sorry about that. Valerie Harris, Valerie Still.
The representative from Gorham Homes asked at the end of her statement, if not here, where? Perhaps the answer is not in flood zone 3, not where there is already an established business bringing revenue into Bristol, not where innumerable mature trees will have to be sacrificed, and not in a conservation area destroying the character of this end of the harbour, all going against the council's own policies. One whiff of affordable homes and the committee will feel obliged to give permission. But the Redloff report makes it clear this scheme is barely viable even at 100% private sales. Where is the evidence that grant funding will be available? The Environment Agency has only withdrawn its objection because a contribution to the flood strategy is promised. Where is this money coming from and how much will it be? This application should not have been brought to committee in the dying days of the current administration, as it is such a blatantly political move to set precedents to ensure the future of the Western Harbour Vanity project.
Thank you. Stephen Wickham.
Thank you. We've got the pretty pictures of the water in flood. In 3 years of asking, Griffith have rebuilt the river wall, and the Gorham Homes team have still failed to produce a TVIA of their proposal from the southern iconic viewpoints, P28 and P29, just 100 metres away across the river to the south. They've produced a wide-angle, inaccurate CGI for your private briefing yesterday. At up to 10 metres above the lamppost on Cumberland Road, it now seems fair to assume that they were afraid of it, ashamed of it, or really didn't care what the public thought about their proposals. Paragraph 11D1 of the NPPF is quite clear the presumption in favour does not apply when the application of policies in this framework that protect areas or assets of particular importance provides a clear reason for refusing the development proposed. And those areas and assets include designated heritage assets and conservation areas. On balance, the panel considers that in this current form, and as a result of an inadequate assessment of all views, the proposal does not meet the relevant heritage policy test contained in the local plan and the NPPF. It does not generate sufficient public benefits that outweigh the significant harm that it will cause, and therefore this application cannot be supported.
Gabby Solly.
The report is a mixture of untruths and selective quoting of policies positive to the application. All the policies disallowing this development are ignored. There are no identified sites for the required 162 tree replacements. This is not a brownfield site. It is not and has never been occupied by a permanent structure, which the NPPF definition demands. The developer admits there won't be any safe flood escape route for residents or access for emergency services for at least a decade. The promise of funding for BAFS is nothing other than a bribe to the Environment Agency, who are partners in the project. The development is not financially viable with the promised affordable housing, which at 80% market rent in one of Bristol's most expensive areas is not affordable anyway for the majority of people. How much precious life will be endangered or destroyed for this development to go ahead?
Christina Macario.
As Development Director at the Council's own housing company, Gorham Homes, it's my job to transform council land into the new homes so desperately needed in our city. On any given night, around 3,000 people are homeless, many in temporary accommodation. We must provide high-quality homes in central Bristol that will house people for generations to come. Baltic Wharf has been a caravan park for visitors to our city. It could become home to hundreds of Bristolians. While not without its challenges, we've worked tirelessly on this development to make it the best it can be, to create high-quality, sustainable homes and new public spaces on this part of the waterfront for the first time in decades. The development is safe, and the Environment Agency has removed its objection. We've kept as many trees as we can while making space for much-needed new homes. We'll plant 220 new trees too. 40% of the homes will be affordable, 50 of which the lowest form of council rent. With grant funding, 100% could be council homes for social rent and shared ownership. Thanks to everyone who has gotten involved in this scheme, who has challenged it and helped us make it better. These decisions aren't always easy, but I ask you this, if not here, where?
Glyn Mutton.
Good afternoon, members. I work for Hill, Gorham's development partner for this project. We're a family-owned bespoke house builder. Whilst relatively new to Bristol, we're actively involved in bringing forward over 700 homes for the city, with well over half of these for affordable tenure. In doing so, we provide not just high-quality homes for Bristolians, but jobs, support for local supply chains, and broader social value. This application is part of this and is in a highly sustainable location, well connected to local amenities, employment, and travel connections. It will provide increased connectivity to the waterfront, the creation of dedicated cultural space with new public access to Cumberland Road via high-quality landscape new space, allowing residents of Bristol to continue to enjoy its harbourside setting. The design is moderate and appropriate in scale, achieving local plan densities. Homes are spacious, 10-year blind, designed to a high quality and offer accessibility for adapting needs. They will remain safe from flooding and powered by low carbon technology, made ready for Bristol's expanding heat network. The significant challenge has been the loss of trees and the consequence of biodiversity, which is regrettable. However, retention options have been fully explored, particularly on the eastern boundary, and supplemented with additional screening. Mitigation measures are comprehensive and commitments made to reach a positive biodiversity position. This is a fantastic opportunity.
Can I bring you to a close, please? Thank you.
To deliver not just much needed homes, but also the opportunity for businesses, cultural engagement, and a new public space for Bristol.
Councillor McAllister.
Thank you, Chair. I've brought up a number of issues in my written statement, but right now I'd just like to focus on one key aspect of this application. I do welcome the prospect of many new affordable homes. Bristol deserves the high quality affordable development this could bring. But a lot of this application's appropriateness and acceptability hinges on planning conditions, and that be that from trees to flood defences to construction times, and crucially the affordable element of housing to an extent. Bristol Council unfortunately has a very poor history of enforcing planning conditions, especially against itself. Members will be aware of the long-running saga of the Metrobus conditions, which have left residents of Avon Crescent close to the Baltic Wharf site in limbo for a decade. If the committee cannot be confident that planning conditions relating to this application are solid, then I urge the members to refer the application back to review. Trust in the council and the need for affordable and safe housing that can be depended upon depends upon us getting this right. Thank you.
Martin Rands. Martin.
Thank you very much. Yes, I'm just going to basically say what Patrick said. Some of the members were here 10 years ago for the Metrobus consent, and there were some conditions attached to that which have never been met, and the council has ever since refused to enforce them. One of the great selling points we were promised with Metrobus was we were going to have flood defences was supposed to be part of it. Down Cumberland Road, they were supposed to be built all the way down to the Vauxhall Bridge. They were never built. So I think this scheme is safe if the flood defences are built to sweep, but they won't be, and the council won't enforce when they're not.
Can I thank you for that? As I said, copies of every submission were circulated to members before. I would also say, to be honest, there was at least one comment which I would say, in my view, was unsubstantiated and even libelous. And at least I welcome the fact from next month, standing orders will change, and in fact, there will be 2 days after receipt of committee papers, or certainly public forum before they're published, and that will allow officers to actually have the time to look more carefully through them. Obviously, I don't wish to actually censor people, but I do think it's important we're not libelous. Could I move to Gemma, the case officer? This is Gemma's first occasion actually presenting to committee, so welcome. The members aren't too bad, the chairman's a bit of a tartar, of course. I have exceptionally given you 10 minutes, Gemma, to present. Hopefully that extra time will allow some time to actually inform members, prep their questions. Gemma?
Thank you. There's just a few technical issues. What's on my screen is not showing what is up there. I don't know. See if I can start again. Let's try again.
I haven't started.
There we go. Sorry about that. So, thank you, Chair. Afternoon, members. Firstly, I refer you to the received, which provides the latest ecology comments. You'll note they are of no objections and suggest conditions. There's also some updated transport conditions there. There's also been 4 further objections and further objections from the Bristol Tree Forum since the officer's report. However, the officer's recommendation hasn't changed from the report. This application is for the site on Baltic Wharf Caravan site. The site is on Spike Island, to the north of Cumberland Road and the River Avon, and to the south of the floating harbour. To the east is existing residential, and to the west is the sailing club and boatyard. The existing site is 0.8 hectares that is currently occupied by a caravan park which consists mainly of hard standing, gravel, with some grass areas, a toilet block, warden's accommodation and parking. There are a large number of trees on the existing site. The application is for the erection of 166 residential properties and 555 square metres of commercial space on the lower and upper ground floor levels to the north, facing out towards the floating harbour. The commercial uses could include arts, workspace, cafes and restaurants, etc. The site is mainly in flood zone 3, with a small part of the southwestern side in flood zone 2. The site lies within the City Docks conservation area. The units will be over 6 blocks across the site, ranging from 3 to 6 stories. The height of the blocks are lower towards the boundaries of the site, with the tallest block of 6 stories in the centre of the site. Block F to reduce the visual impact. The units adjacent to Cumberland Road and to the eastern side will be lower, with a flat roof to reduce bulk and massing. In regards to the affordable housing provision, 66 dwellings will be affordable, equating to 40%, which is the policy requirement for the area. 50 of these will be for social rent and 16 for shared ownership. There will be a mix of 71 beds, 82 two-beds and 14 three-bedroom properties across the site for both open market and affordable housing. The density of the site is 193 dwellings per hectare. The Urban Living SPD states the optimum density would be approximately 200 dwellings per hectare. The scheme has been subject to an independent design review panel and city design panel. Car parking and cycle parking will be provided via ramp access to lower ground floor level from the southern side of the site, with a vehicle access from Cumberland Road. The remaining site will be vehicle-free. 74 car parking spaces, which will include 6 fully accessible spaces, will be provided on the lower ground floor, with 20% of these active car charging points. A car club space will be provided within the vicinity of the site, with membership provided to all residents of the site. There will be 310 cycle spaces provided. The site is considered to be a low-car development. A restriction on resident parking permits for future residents of the site will prevent parking overspill onto the adjacent roads. Delivery bays will be provided at the entrance of the development, with electric trolleys to help move equipment and deliveries to the commercial units. There is a mixture of public and private amenity space provided across the site. All homes will have private amenity space either through gardens, terraces or balconies, along with play areas on the podium garden area and other play equipment around the site. Whilst these play areas are away from the public area, they are accessible for all residents. There will be a new permissive public path running through the centre of the site that will allow the public to walk from Cumberland Road through to Floating Harbour. The historic stone wall on the southern edge will be maintained, however the existing entrance will be widened to provide suitable vehicle access. There will be the removal of the existing brick infill in the wall to provide additional pedestrian access route to the site. The following slides provide some visuals of the proposed units. This slide shows the proposal from the northern side looking back towards the harbour. The commercial units would be located on the ground floor areas at the 2 blocks A and B that front the harbour, with the site rising 2.6 metres up from the quayside walk into the development. The top visual is looking towards the site from the south, Cumberland Road side. The bottom is looking towards the site from the west. This visual shows the proposal looking from the east and the adjacent residential units. This plan shows a cross-section of the site with the adjacent houses. The distance between the blocks and the existing residential is between 18 to 21 metres, which are acceptable distances between dwellings. In order to further protect the residential amenity of the existing residents to the east, the design has incorporated screening panels on the balconies, utilised smaller windows and raised window sill heights. In addition, the majority of the existing trees along the eastern boundary will remain. The next few slides show some of the floor plans of the units. This is the lower ground floor, which shows the layout of the underground car parking, cycle parking and plant rooms. To the north, you can see the one commercial unit. This slide shows the upper ground floor level, which shows the commercial units on the northern side of blocks A and B. In the remainder blocks, further back from the harbour, is a mix of 1, 2 and 3 bedroom units. At this level is also the public walkway through the centre of the site and a large part of the landscaping. This is the first floor plan, which shows that there is a mix of 1, 2 and 3 bedroom units across the site. I won't show you every single floor plan. The remainder of the floor plans is fairly similar in layout and units. This plan shows the cross-section of buildings A and part of F, the centre unit. As can be seen, the car park is on the lower ground floor, commercial units at the front of Unit A, with the residential units above. The podium guardings are set at the upper ground floor adjacent to Unit F. Very similar cross-sectional diagram showing units B, C and D along the eastern side of the site. Again, car parking and cycle store on the lower ground floor, commercial units to the front of the Block B and residential above. This application has been in for a period of 3 years, and over this period there have been approximately 400 objections raised. The key issues that have been raised include the loss of trees from the site, flood risk, impact upon the character of the area, scale and height of the scheme, insufficient parking on site, loss of light and overshadowing, impact of winds on water sports on the harbour. I will now cover some of these key issues raised. In regards to the heritage impact, the site is adjacent to the locally listed building of the Cottage Public House and within the setting of a number of Grade 2 and Grade 2 style listed buildings within the wider area, including Under 4 Yard, Bond Warehouses and the Vauxhall Bridge. Both City Design Group and Historic England have stated that the scheme will have an impact upon the setting of the listed buildings in the immediate context, but the degree of harm is judged to be less than substantial. The site lies within Flood Zone 3A. The LLFA have no objections based on the additional report submitted, which shows there will be a safe access and egress route to and from the site, and it has been accepted that the risk from flooding on the site is unlikely until 2070, by which time the LLFA are confident that the Bristol and Avon flood strategy will be completed. The Environment Agency have also withdrawn their objection to the proposal, subject to conditions, and the proposal will meet both the existing policy and emergent local plan policy. It is considered to have met both the sequential test and the exception test. The Environment Agency have acknowledged the mitigation that is proposed for the site, including raising the residential finished floor level to above the design flood level, only locating less vulnerable uses on the ground floor level, providing both internal and external egress routes to raised ground, providing external doorways from the upper ground floor level to raised ground and the road, and demonstrating safe access until the baths is built. It is acknowledged that a large number of trees will be lost from the site, 82 in total. It is proposed for 68 new trees to be planted on the site. These will be approximately 4.5 metres to 5 metres tall and will include cherry, alder, hornbeam and whitebeam. The existing trees along the eastern boundary will remain. In accordance with the Bristol tree replacement policy, a further 160 trees will be required to be planted off-site. It is envisaged that 10 trees will be planted along the Quayside Path and Cumberland Road, but further investigation will be required by Parks Development to ensure these are suitable locations in regards to underground services. The final locations of the replacement trees will be determined as part of the Section 106 agreements in agreement with the Bristol Parks Development team. In regards to biodiversity net gain on the site, as the application was submitted 3 years ago, the 10% net gain does not apply to this site. However, an overall net gain should be identified. The site will be providing green biodiverse roofs, additional native hedge and tree shrub planting, rain garden and species-rich grass lawns. The applicants have submitted updated BNG metrics as national guidance has changed and have now used the statutory metric. The latest metric results in a net gain of 27% for hedgerows and a loss of minus 7.86 of habitats overall, equating to half a BNG unit that will need to be mitigated within the Section 106. The next few slides are just some photo montages of pre and post development. The first is looking from the northeast down towards the southwest towards the harbour and the site. This one's looking towards the site from Vauxhall Bridge. This is looking across the water in the harbour towards the south, towards the site and the sailing club. In conclusion, officers consider the planning balance that the benefits of the scheme outweigh the harm. There are no technical nor statutory objections to the scheme, and therefore it is officers' recommendation to grant approval subject to the recommended conditions and upon completion of the Section 106. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Jan. I'm told by the DSO that you're bang on for your presentation, so well done. I'm sure the chief planner can advise her colleagues that they ought to emulate Jan. Could I first of all invite the rep from Legal Services, who I believe will respond to my request to the statement by the Tree Forum?
In what respect did you want me to respond?
I think it's the confirmation that the Act that's been quoted as not being complied with has actually been complied with, as I've advised several times before.
Apologies. Yes, so section 100B, the Local Government Act that's referred to, refers to reports, and in this instance relates to the officer's report. And as long as there's no material changes, then the deadline has been complied with.
Councillor Jackson.
Thank you very much, and thank you for your first presentation. It was excellent.
Could I just make clear, I haven't started general questions.
Oh, sorry.
But I'm assuming it's to the legal officer. No. Are there any questions on that? No. In that case, sorry. Could I also say thank you for that? Jim Cliff, this kind of came up from his dungeon down beneath, our planning obligations officer. Jim, do you want to address any items now, or would you prefer to leave it to member questions?
Good afternoon, Councillor Odie. No, I'm really here to pick up any questions that might arise. I have nothing to say unless asked.
Right, in that case, we'll move on to member questions. Gemma, can I just, although it doesn't feature in the tree forum statement, I can understand where they're coming from with their frustration. But although planning applications may meet the present Bristol tree standard, a large number are off-site. For example, 112 here. And all too often, we don't appear as council to being very speedy in identifying replacement sites. Is there any way we could inject into the conditions some urgency, or, as I suspect the answer is, because in my view, this administration has not been as, shall we say, hot on this issue as they could have been. It may require a future administration elected next Thursday.
Thank you, Chair. I'm sorry, I don't know about the past history of the delivery of the tree sites, but I do know from talking to Parks Development that they are looking for locations for these trees whilst we're developing the Section 106. So I'm hoping that that will help speed up the process.
Okay, thanks. Chris.
You've partly answered one of my questions, and again, thank you for your presentation. Obviously, there's some negatives for this. One thing, if you just maybe enhance for me, please, the flooding, because the environment did have an objection in a while back, I believe. Is that correct? Environment Agency, but now that's been removed. Can you just give a bit more information? Yeah. I am talking into the...
Could I...
Sorry.
Should we not have a debate, but that's a helpful point. If we can try to address the microphone, please.
Okay, yeah, because obviously that objection's been removed. Can you just give me a bit more clarity on that decision, please, and why?
Yes, certainly, Councillor Jackson. So originally, the Environment Agency did have objections. There have been a considerable, I think it's like 14 reiterations of the flood risk assessment. The applicants have taken on board all the comments raised by the Environment Agency and have provided a lot of mitigation within their reports. And it is acknowledged that the vulnerable uses, the residential, are above the design flood zone, and the basement levels then will be allowed to flood, which is just where the car parking and the plant rooms are.
Thank you. That's clarified that for me. And just moving on from the chair's thing about the trees, we had a briefing, and I'm just wondering, especially with parks, is everything possible going to be done to try to replace them trees within that smaller area? I know that they're looking at places around, not right on that site, but can we make sure that every possible opportunity, if this does get passed, that they try to fit as many in that area as possible? Is that, can we add that to the restrictions or the things that needs to be done?
Certainly, I know they try to fit as many within the 1 mile radius as they can. So it's certainly something we can look into, encouraging further.
Be one of the restrictions if it gets passed that it has to be done? Possible to put on there?
We can certainly put that in as well, but just to be aware, in addition as well, there is, from a B&G point of view, from a biodiversity net gain, it is in the applicant's interest to, and there is a hierarchy within that anyway, to replace as close as possible.
Okay, thank you. That's fine. Thank you.
Fee.
Question probably for Steve or maybe for legal advisor. We've been invited by some of the commentators here to defer this application because of the concerns around insufficient information on some aspects. What would the process be for that, please? Is that one for you, Steve, or is it a legal one? How do we do that? Or should we want to? Or should we want to test the will of the room? Thank you.
I would say, obviously, I took advice from officers about this. Clearly, as we've heard from legal, actually the primary legislation and the council's commitments about openness and actually considering information have not been breached. That's advice, that's what I was reacting. It will be for the committee, in my view, in debate, just to actually to flash out whether they think there's sufficient information to make a determination today. If they do, the answer is refuse or approve. If they think not, I will clearly test the mood of the House if there's support for actually deferral. That would be
so
appropriate.
I'm just to check, because I've seen the correspondence flying to and forth, and you were clearly of the opinion that should the deferral be appropriate, it's for us to decide in this room. And you're saying that this should occur during the debate phase of this meeting. Thank you. That's a clarity I wanted. I do have a question as well. It seems to be the case that, I think it was the Tree Forum was saying, because this development is taking place on council land, then we need to identify the areas for the replacement trees, because it is council land rather than an external developer. Can you, and this information only arrived this morning. Forgive me, I was in the taxi forum all this morning, so I haven't been able to read properly. Thank you. Here we are. Oh, crikey. Okay, the tree replacement, apparently we do need detailed location for replacement trees because it is our land.
It's in hard standing.
It's in hard standing, thank you. Could you comment on that, please? I think that's something that probably needs clarifying. There has regrettably been quite a lot of information thrown our way quite late in the day, actually, on various elements. So forgive me if I'm not completely versed, but I think it's something we do need to look at.
Thank you. In regards to the Bristol tree replacement policy, there is no distinction between council-owned land and privately owned land. I don't believe it to be provided. So there should be no need for... Have you got further details there?
I can refer you to page 20 of the... Well, sorry, I'm reading from the information we were sent this morning. Page 20 of the...
BTRS, Planning Obligations, SPD. Where it says that if a tree is in a hard
Turn yourself on, hang on. I'm sorry, I feel forgive me, Chair, but Paula is amplifying on my point.
I just want to get clarification, because this is the information that we've been sent, as you said, very late. And what the information, the assertion here from members of the public is that on page 20 it says that if you have a tree, if it's on council land, and if you have a tree in hard standing, before the approval can be given, you have to identify the replacement hard stand, where exactly you're going to put those street trees. I don't know whether that's true or not, but it's something I think that we do need to bottom out, because I don't want to be in a situation where we're told afterwards that we made decisions without having enough information.
Thank you. You did much better.
I don't know that I did.
Thank you. I mean, the SPD is a consideration, but it's not policy, it's guidance. What I would also say is that the conservation officer has looked, our ecology officer, I should rather say natural conservation officer, has looked at the commons again and has confirmed that that she's content that everything that needs to be complied with has been complied with, and that the conditions are covering everything that needs to be covered.
Tom.
Thank you. Apologies for banging on about trees, but I think it is quite an important aspect of this application. Could you just outline for me really clearly how many trees it is that will need to be planted off-site, and how many of those, you mentioned there was conversations ongoing about finding sites for them. How many sites have been found so far, and how many are we still waiting for? And am I correct in thinking that the S106 will be, you have to have a site allocated for all of those before we can sign that condition off? Or is it just as many as we can and then X% will be left over at the end? And my second question, was just about the flooding again, because that's the other big thing for me, is about the safety. And I'd really like you to take us all through the timeline really clearly about what's happened with the Environment Agency and what it is specifically that made them lift their objection, because the concern they initially had was that there was no access or egress for people in the event of a flood. Are they now saying that that's no longer the case and that's why they've lifted their objection? But if you could just be really clear on that, that'd be really helpful for me.
Thank you. So in regards to the tree numbers, I think it was the original question there. So there'll be planting of 68 new trees on the site itself, and then there'll be a further 162 trees planted outside. It's anticipated that 10 of these would be on the path side by the harbour, front floating harbour, and on Cumberland Road. With Parks Development, they are currently mapping locations for these trees, and they're looking to have that undertaken ready for the Section 106 agreements. Okay, so does that answer all that first question? Apologies if I've missed a bit of that.
So of those 160, so there's currently none that have already been allocated for, like, where sites have been allocated, or?
They've identified about 40 sites so far, but it's ongoing work, and it obviously takes a fair bit of time. So they said it would be over the next few weeks while they're developing the Section 106, they'll be able to provide a full mapping of all the trees.
A full mapping, okay.
I think they've also, in addition to that, sort of identified how many of those can be in soft standing and how many in hard standing, because that's the key difference, because clearly in hard standing is a lot more expensive, and basically the majority is identified for hard standing and therefore a lot more costly.
Philippa.
Thanks so much. I've got a couple of questions arising from the public forum.
Sorry. I do apologise. It was my fault. Sorry.
Okay, so if I remember rightly, it was regarding the Environment Agency and the objections and the alterations. So throughout the process, they have had various concerns raised. With the access and the exit from the site, the LLFA have stated they had no objections rather than the Environment Agency. They said that the LLFA would be the best persons for commenting on that one. In regards to that, the access is safe up until 2070, beyond which then the access would be potentially flooded for up to an hour. However, with the baths coming forward, with certainty that should be in place by 2070, and therefore it gives lifetime safety for the residents on the site. And it's due to this lifetime protection, that's why EA have removed their objection.
Right, Philippa.
Thank you. As I said, a couple of questions just arising from public forum. One is to do with the views, and I'm never quite sure about whether views are a material planning consideration, which I don't think they are, but do views become material if it's part of the heritage assets? Is that correct?
Yeah, that's correct, basically. So you don't have like a personal view as your material consideration, but if it's part of a heritage asset or like conservation area, then yes, it would be considered as part of a material consideration.
Then my other question was just to do with the overshadowing and the distance between buildings. Is the closest distance would be 18 metres.
That's correct, yeah, the closest distance on that eastern edge.
Okay, thank you. And that's within the standards that we have. Yeah, okay, thank you.
Andrew.
So a gentleman mentioned in public forum. Can you hear me okay? No.
Hello? Is that better?
Yeah.
I thought it didn't sound quite right. Thank you. So yeah, I've got a question similar to Councillor Humes actually about overlooking. A gentleman mentioned in public forum that his garden's about to be overlooked by 80 windows. And I just wanted to clarify that this scheme is definitely policy compliant in terms of overlooking and overshadowing and distance of windows from neighbouring properties. I mean, I have to say, you know, to have a garden in a city centre location, have no overlooking whatsoever is a rare luxury. But we need to make sure that the scheme is policy compliant, and also what mitigations been put in place to minimise overlooking. Thank you.
Yeah, I can confirm that it is policy compliant, and as stated before, we got the distances there of between 18 to 21 metres along that eastern edge with the existing residents. In terms of mitigation, balconies have had screening put on them to prevent the overlooking. Windows have been like smaller windows all along the eastern side, so they're not such large windows there, and they have raised sill heights as well, so it's more difficult for people to be looking out, standing there looking out over through there.
Andrew.
Yeah, just a second question about the SIL contributions. So I think it said in the planning obligations package that SIL funding, it would attract 1.7 million residential approx and 140,000 for commercial. Would that SIL contribution change if the amount of affordable housing, social housing in the development changes, you know, if it becomes 100% affordable?
Yeah, that'll be one for me. Yes, so any social housing is eligible for 100% relief from SIL. So the figure I think at the moment was about 1.7 million for the residential element. That will reduce. That's assuming an open market development, because that's how it's calculated until any relief is claimed. So if we assume that the development will provide 40% affordable housing, which is what it's saying it's going to do and is being determined on that basis, then I would anticipate that the SIL will be about £1 million, 40% of 1.7 million. Obviously, if the whole lot becomes affordable housing, which could happen on any development, you know, if depending on what happens in the future with it, then the SIL could be down to nil for the residential. That is something that we cannot control, either yourselves as a planning committee or myself as the SIL officer. It's just what the regulations say. But as it stands at the moment, I would anticipate that at 40% affordable housing, the residential SIL will be about £1 million, Councillor Varney.
Paula.
Thank you. I sort of have three questions, if that's okay. The first one is, you know, it says in the report that a contribution will be made to the flooding, the BAFS. Can we ask how much that is, the sum? Second question is, if it does translate into being 100% proposal, 100% affordable, at the briefing yesterday, there was mention of the fact that, you know, sort of all the interiors perhaps would have to be reconfigured, or there'd have to be some changes. How would that actually do? I mean, I remember from something previously in my ward where there were amendments being made to a proposal, and we got to a certain trigger point. You know, you could have, I think it was like an S72 or something. You could list a whole load of changes, or else then at some point it would have to trigger a whole new planning. So could you tell us a little bit about what the changes could be? And my third question then is about the BNG. So, and bear with me on this one. I was yesterday, I sit on the Downs as well, and yesterday I met with the education officer of the Downs, and conversation drifted on. We were talking about this, and we talked about the whole biodiversity net gain thing and loss. And obviously, it's a huge concern to me that there is no biodiversity net gain on this proposal. And we were talking about how that could be achieved, and the whole bit about the trees and its problems. And the education officer said, well, you know, somewhere on the Downs, like somewhere like the Goat Gully, you could massively increase the biodiversity of a special site within Bristol, because I know that there's a lot of the concern is about the fact that we'll just sell off the biodiversity net gain and it'll go outside Bristol. So I'm really keen to try to keep that within Bristol. So would it be possible for, you know, for something, you know, very innovative and good to be done like that, so that we could look at our sites here, so something like the Goat Gully or something else on the Downs, where you could restore really fantastic grasslands and species and use the money from this site to do that? And could we have that as a condition?
Thank you very much. So the BAFS contribution, so we have a commitment from the applicants that they will provide a BAFS contribution. However, that is still to be determined as part of, it won't form part of the Section 106, it will be a separate contribution, but it'll be formalised that way. So I can't give you an exact figure at the moment because we're still working through that at the moment. In regards to alterations, you're right, it's Section 73 would be a new application if amendments and changes. So to the it'd be things like numbers, number of bedrooms, so altering the mix, etc. The design, all of that would come under Section 73, and it's essentially a whole new planning application that you would be looking at. And I'll pass to Simone for BNG.
Yes, so and just to clarify, it's not that there is no BNG already, like Gemma has already explained. There is already significant hedgerow positive BNGs on the habitat side, where we're looking at additional offside requirements. Like I explained earlier, it's within the setup of BNG already that it favours within the local authority solutions. It's within the BNG hierarchy built in. In addition to that, our parks colleagues, again, have already been doing a lot of work in that space, because it is something that we are very keen on as an authority as well, to make sure that BNG is positively provided within Bristol and as close as possible to the places where the loss is occurring.
Could I just add, as I'm sure you're aware, for the last 12 years, planning policy in Bristol's been agreed by the mayoral administration. Obviously, from next Wednesday, we're back to committee rule, so it will be for actually the councillors to look at policy, of course, in those terms. But we have to determine this based on current policy. So I've got Tim.
Thank you, Chair. I want to ask a question about comments from the strategic housing in the report. There are a couple of comments. One, it would be useful to discuss with the applicant about whether the current M4 units are fully accessible. And also, early consultation is recommended to minimise high service charge costs. I'm just wondering whether either of those are things that can be made conditions of the application, or whether the conversations have already taken place, or whether they will take place, at what point they might take place.
Thank you. Yeah, there are ongoing conversations. However, there is what they require is a lettings plan, which provides all these extra details, and that's forms part of the conditions of this planning application. So it will form part of the lettings plan that they will then agree as part of a condition.
And a second question, sorry, just under the objections, I noticed there was one objection about whether or not properties would be able to get home insurance because of the flood risk. I didn't know if you could address that.
Yeah, I certainly can. So there are a number of houses already in the area that can receive insurance there. Given that the residential units are above the flood plain level, that it shouldn't stop or prevent any flood insurance for the houses.
John?
Thank you, Chairman, and thank you for the report. 2 questions, if I may. Just to go back to trees again, it wasn't completely clear for me if this development can go ahead without the alternative sites being identified. I know you kind of said that they're going to be working on over the next couple of weeks whilst the S106 is done, but it wasn't explicitly clear that it's a condition of this application that all of those other 162 trees have to have locations before this can go ahead. That was the first question.
So for determination of the application, it's not considered that every single location of those trees will need to be determined prior to the determination. It will be as part of the section 106 for this application that will provide the details of the location and the mapping of each of those trees.
As I'm sure you know, John, no planning consent is complete by the determination by this committee. It only becomes substantive once the section 106, if that's required, is complete.
And so the section 106 has to include the locations of all the trees, and the application can't go ahead until the section 106. Right, so that's clarity, thank you. And the second thing was just a point that was made that this isn't a brownfield site. Can you comment on that? And I noticed you didn't use the word brownfield either, so is it a brownfield site?
Yes, it is considered a brownfield site, yet there are buildings on site, but it was also formerly a timber yard prior to becoming a caravan park. So it is considered a brownfield site.
Tom.
Thank you. You've answered a couple of the questions I had. My one was about the affordable element. There was a claim made about the viability of the scheme and the effect that that might have on it coming forward and the amount of affordable it can provide. How cast iron is that 40%? And if funding is being sought for turning it into 100% affordable, Paula mentioned about that there could be the need for a new planning application. Is that your sort of take on it? For example, if we had the 40% and then they did get the grant funding, is it likely that another application would have to come forward to facilitate that scheme moving to 100%?
Shall I pick that one up? Taking the last part of your question first, Councillor Hathaway, it sounds a bit mean to say so, but it's actually outside of the planning system and what we're determining at the moment. The planning system, as far as affordable housing is concerned, is only concerned with whether a planning policy compliant level of affordable housing can be provided. And under the council's policies, that maximum amount that is provided through the planning system is 40%. So if at some future point in time the developer wants to provide more than that 40%, and in order to do that, they needed to reconfigure or do something else, then they would need to submit a Section 73 planning application or a whole new application. But that is, it sounds awful to say, it's neither here nor there, in effect, as far as this committee is concerned in determining this application. Going backwards to the first part of your question about viability, it's quite an odd set of circumstances, this one. I spend my life looking at viability appraisals where people are claiming they can afford no affordable housing, and then I come here and give you grim news and you always dread seeing me at these things. This one, there's a viability appraisal and viability report's been submitted, yet the applicant has said they are providing 40% affordable housing with nil subsidy through the planning system. So how they do that, through the landowner taking a reduced land value or the developer making a lower profit or what have you, is actually their business. We don't really care, and it sounds a little bit flippant, but that's the long and short of it. They're offering 40% in a policy compliant set of proportions, so 75% of that 40% would be social rent, which is rent at only 50% of open market value, and the rest of it would be shared ownership, which is where the housing association owns a proportion and the person who owns the other proportion. So that is absolutely in accordance with our housing enabling strategy and what we need, the cities need. So they said they're providing that 40% affordable housing, and that's absolutely fine. Planning practice guidance clarifies that there is not a mechanism in place to allow developers to come back in and seek to have that level reduced, because the granting of planning permission crystallises a development risk. There's nothing that could stop a future developer putting in a new application. You can't stop that, but they can't come back in and seek to renegotiate that figure down. So they're offering 40% in a proportion that the council wants. The fact their viability says that they don't think they can afford it is almost neither here nor there. Their offer is there. It is policy compliant.
Fee.
2 points. One, just picking up what you're saying, Jim. The definition of affordable housing, that's something that lies outside of our scope, isn't it? It is what it is. It's a sort of nationally agreed term, because I know there's been queries about, well, it's not really affordable because it's X, but that's not something we can really go behind, is it?
There are a number of things that are affordable housing.
We don't. My point being, we don't define it, do we?
We don't define it, but this particular application is setting out the type of affordable that will be provided, which is social rent or shared ownership, which are the types of affordable housing that the city needs most of all. So it's not first homes, and it's not what's called affordable rent, which is rented at 80% of open market value.
In terms of our policy requirements, affordable housing is affordable housing, and we can't say it's the wrong kind of affordable housing. It just is what I'm trying to say.
That's correct, but this is the right type of affordable housing as far as our affordable.
And I have a second question, going back to the trees. I'm reassured by the clarification that John obtained that in order to start building, they need to fulfil the Section 106 agreement, which means finding locations for the replacement trees, which is a good thing. However, heaven forfend, who enforces the enforcer should Gorham Homes or the council not fulfil their own conditions? Because I think there's probably a certain amount of, I was going to say cynicism, but too harsh. But there's a certain amount of cynicism about the council's ability to prosecute itself, as well, especially when it comes to tree, because obviously enforcement around tree issues has been low on the agenda. I mean, we've got very tight constraints on our enforcement capability anyway. So were heaven forfend the council not to fulfil its own obligations around tree replacement, who would enforce it?
It is still our planning enforcement team, and I assure you they will also enforce it, and clearly it will also depend, any new administration can also say how much of a priority to give it. What I would also add is that clearly we're in a much better place now than, for instance, when I started. When I started, there were 0 tree officers in post. We now have 2 tree officers back in post. They've caught up on backlogs, and we're taking it very seriously.
Could I also add, and I fully understand where you're coming from, because I agree with the record historically hasn't been great, but after next Thursday, the Omlets organisation, which is Gorham Homes, will have council reps from the new committee rule. So it's very much, we will be sitting there as directors, or someone will, to actually influence from internally Gorham Homes, which is more than we have for a private sector applicant, of course. So, Paula.
I wanted to just go back to Jim about the affordable rents, because you said, and I just want clarification of this, you said that the rent would be 50% of the market rate, and somebody from the public gallery corrected you and said 80%. Can we just have a clarification on that, please?
You can, 50%. So social rent is rent that is set at, it might be up a couple of percentage points either side, but as in my experience, it's always maybe a couple of percentage points above or below, but it's basically 50%. That is what social rented affordable accommodation is. There is a different type of affordable accommodation called affordable rent, where the rent can be up to 80%. But what we're securing through Section 106 agreement is social rent, which will be at about 50% of open market value.
Yeah, it's important to make that point. And how many homes will be at that rate?
50. So 50 out of the 166 will be at social rent, and 16 would be at shared ownership.
Tom, did I see your hand? No. In that case, can I suggest we move to the debate, of course? This application's been extant for about over 3 years, which is quite some time, even allowing for the backlog, of course. And clearly there were substantial issues such as the flooding risk, which needed to be bottomed out. At the time, as I've already mentioned, I was publicly quite trenchant about the existing caravan park near the docks. And, you know, it was good that a city, in my view, like Bristol, had that. And I didn't particularly want to actually evict the caravan park, as has happened. Having said that, that's history. We are where we are. We have to consider this application from Gorham Homes here and now. To me, always the issue was actually the flooding risk. No puns intended. If the Environment Agency maintained their objection, I believe that would sink this scheme. They haven't. They actually believe there are reasonable ways of controlling the risk, and they've actually lifted their objection. And we've also seen significant physical works proposed by the applicant, which will minimise the risk, of course, as well as significant contributions to the flooding strategy, of course. That makes it a different ballgame as far as I'm concerned. We then have a proposal for 166 homes, at least 40% affordable, possibly 100%. And now that's something which every party represented here, I'm sure would give their eye teeth to see more of. And that is powerful to me. I've looked at the scheme both in urban design terms. It's opening up across Spike Island from the docks to the new cut, and it's positive, of course. And I believe it's the sort of scheme with the B&G gain of almost 30%, which one should support, actually, and I believe it should go ahead. I don't know whether it's more of an advice note, but Chris Jackson's point about, if possible, maybe advice to parks, or if they could actually seek to actually replace more trees within a 1 mile radius of the site would be more convincing to me. But I will be supporting this application. Chris?
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, obviously, with planning applications, none of them are perfect, and neither is this one. But there's some negative stuff. Two of the points Richard raised, I'm very happy. I was going to ask about, obviously, the flooding. That's the environment that has made a big difference. There's a lot of gains to this, and the fact that we're going to get 66 affordable houses in that area is amazing. I mean, I would like to see 100% if we can, but that's a real positive to that site. We're opening up the site. Like I say, I've used that site in my caravan before, but that's obviously gone. And like Richard said, we've now got to use it, make this decision on where we are. It was a brownfield site, so that's well within our policy. There's commercial units there. You're going to open it up. It's going to be more accessible to people. There's more open space. I was pleased to see the car club thing in there, because that's always a good thing. And I do quite like the design, although that's not as a planning thing, but it does look quite nice. So for me, the positives greatly outweigh the negatives, and I will be supporting this application.
Tom?
Thank you, and thank you for the report. I think we often see at this committee sites come forward which developers describe as difficult, and it tends to be a bit of an excuse to cram as many homes in as they can, as high as they can, but which reflects well on their bottom line. But it's clear that that's not the case here. I think it's taken quite a long time to resolve the issues around flooding, and it's obviously a bit lamentable that it's been hurried through this close to an election, but I hear that those safety concerns have been addressed, and that was a major bone of contention for me. The other bone of contention was, however, the mature trees, the loss of the trees, and the biodiversity net gain. And for a flagship site of the council's own developer, I think it's a shame they haven't been able to be an exemplar here. I think it really underlines the importance of starting with those aspects and working around them. However, on balance, I think that the secured affordable housing here in an area that would otherwise be totally inaccessible for those that are most in need, and that reassurance that that figure can only go higher, along with, as you've said, about the S106 requirement to find sites for those trees, those outweigh the negatives for me, and I am in support of it.
Andrew?
Yeah, thank you very much, Chairman. I find myself in agreement with yourself and the two previous speakers. I think the scheme has proved to be very controversial, and I think that's a pity, really, because I think in many ways it's quite an exemplary scheme. You know, it is a highly sustainable development in a highly sustainable location. Obviously, there were a couple of big issues for me: the flooding, which we've heard has been addressed, and also the loss of mature trees, which is very regrettable. But, you know, I think it's rather more regrettable that we have a housing waiting list of 21,000 people. So for me, that's the key issue. We are providing much needed homes for Bristolians, and so I will be supporting this application. Thank you.
John?
Yeah, I actually really like the scheme, and I'm reassured by the section 106 and the trees, because that was really the big one for me. The only niggling thing I do have is over the enforcement of the conditions, because we've seen the council try and prosecute itself in the courts recently, which didn't go too well. But on balance, I'll be supporting the application.
Tim?
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, I don't think, in all honesty, we can refuse an application on the grounds that the council won't do what it says it will do. This applies to flood defences and tree planting. Really, it's basically our job to ensure that the council does what it says it will do, and all members will have a responsibility under the new committee system to do that. So we need to double down and try and make sure that everything that we say we're going to do as a council actually gets delivered. Flood strategy in particular is absolutely crucial to the future of our city, and it must be delivered regardless of this particular application. So, hopefully we might have a government soon that takes those risks a bit more seriously and will enable us to do that. But 40% good, affordable housing, absolutely crucial. The people who are always missing from these debates are, to be honest, the people who desperately need that housing. So on their behalf, I'm happy to support this application.
Could I just say, in response to John's point about planning enforcement, John, I'm sure we all share where you're coming from. I'm pleased that the Chief Planner talked about possibly from planning, I believe, transferring to planning officers to augment planning enforcement from later this summer. So I think there's recognition we need to up our game, of course. Could I therefore move to the vote? Can I propose that we grant this application subject to successful completion of the 106 agreement? Philippa, thank you. I'll do a name vote as normal. I'll vote for. Chris?
4.
Philippa?
4.
Tim?
4.
Andrew?
4.
John?
4.
Tom?
4.
B?
4.
And Paula?
4.
It's granted unanimously.
What is onerous as
could
you
I
thought,
suggest
Gemma?
we allowing for rounding? If we meet here, we adjourn and you're ever back in your seats by 3:45 at the latest. Can I just impress upon people, I don't want to actually delay. If you're even a few seconds late, you can't participate in the debate. So look forward to seeing you in just over 20 minutes. Thank you for actually coming back on time. Our esteemed DSO to my left, your right, said I was being dangerously liberal by giving you 20 minutes. He suggested 5 minutes, but, you know, obviously I'm demob happy. So we'll move to public forum. This is clearly on the Debenhams site. The first person is Charlie
Excuse me,
Royal.
Chair, are we going to get the slides sent through via email like we did on the last one?
Send it through in terms of what we presented today?
Yeah.
Yeah, you normally email it to us.
Yeah.
Like it's easier to go round and yeah.
So again, when I call names, if people could signify where they are, and Oliver there in the public gallery will bring you a mic. It's already switched on, so if you hold it 4 inches away from your face, that should be fine. Charlie.
Good afternoon, councillors. 3 years ago, Debenhams closed its doors for the last time. I am director of the company, seeking to bring this site back to life. As specialist in complex urban regeneration, we are seeing the same high street decline across the UK. Meanwhile, Bristol faces a relentless housing crisis. For this site, a housing-led mixed-use redevelopment is the only answer. We are proposing more than 500 new homes, set above a tree-lined pedestrian retail street. 100 of those homes will be affordable. Our proposal would repurpose and transform the site into a green, attractive, safe and vibrant place to live, work and socialise, with an additional £11 million a year spending boost to the struggling Broadmead. It has been a challenge to get to this point, but the scheme before you is outstanding, and I hope you feel able to support our application.
Thank you. Charlotte Burchell. Charlotte.
Good afternoon, councillors. I'm one of Savills planning advisors on this scheme. Like all city centre development, there are impacts, including to heritage assets. However, the level of harm must be weighed against the public benefits. That list of benefits is substantial. 1/3 of the sites will become public open space. It would deliver 100 affordable homes. The historic route through the site will be reinstated. The scheme would deliver a new green lung with 40 new trees. The additional council revenues would stretch into millions. Scale and height are simply a consequence of delivering these benefits. On the question of retaining the existing building, an attempt to list it was rejected by Historic England, clearly demonstrating the existing building is not of sufficient heritage value to retain. The proposals are in accordance with the council's own planning guidance documents, which seek a new route through the site and amplified height. Bristol needs these homes, the city centre needs this regeneration, and Broadmead needs this investment. Thank you.
Thank you, Charlotte. David Finch.
Good afternoon, councillors. I'm the project's landscape architect. It's extremely unusual for 1/3 of a city centre site to be set aside for public open space. We've been able to do this by reinstating the historic street, blocked off during post-war redevelopment through the middle of the site. Extensive landscaping and tree planting will help the site to become a destination in its own right, with cafes and restaurants along the 18.5 metre wide pedestrianised street. With 40 new trees and 100% biodiversity net gain, this site will become a new green lawn for the city centre. The proposed area of green planting is equivalent in size to an Olympic swimming pool. This will be example landscaping that will transform this currently is an unwelcoming, unsafe and unattractive space into a beautiful and vibrant place to be. Thank you.
Tom Brown.
Good afternoon, councillors. I am the Chartered Environmentalist leading on sustainability for this scheme. Our role has been to assess the carbon and energy performance of the proposed development to ensure it meets or exceeds not just your own policies but stringent and demanding industry standards. On all accounts, I can reassure you that the proposed development performs extremely highly, far exceeding your own policies. The building will achieve a 50% reduction over current building regulations and a 42% reduction in residual CO2 emissions, double the planning policy target. This will be achieved by a high efficiency building fabric connection to the district heat network and provision of on-site solar PV. I would like to reassure you that this is a highly sustainable development which will positively contribute towards the Council's net zero commitments. Thank you.
Thank you. Jamie first.
Good afternoon, councillors. I'm the project's lead architect. The design of this scheme is the result of a thorough and collaborative approach with extensive support and input throughout from your design officers. I genuinely believe this high-quality scheme will absolutely transform this redundant and abandoned site that currently detracts from this beautiful city. As a team of designers, we have thoroughly analysed the local and wider context, fully believe a tall building in this location is the right response, creating a striking landmark and a gateway to Broadmead. We have also taken a very considered approach with a range of heights stepping up as we move away from the neighbouring buildings and heritage assets. However, this isn't just about height, but about placemaking. I have no doubt this will be an attractive, safe and vibrant place to live, work, travel through and spend time socialising in. Thank you.
Simon Hickman.
Hiya, I'm Simon Hickman from Historic England. This is a critical time for Bristol, a moment for us all with a role in the city's future to seize positively. Now, Historic England recognises that renewal brings significant opportunities, the potential to provide much-needed housing, to reconnect parts of the city, and to right past planning wrongs. And our ambition should be high, but ambition shouldn't come at the cost of what makes Bristol special. Its long history has produced a cityscape that's rich in character and meaning, a cityscape that you can see above your heads. But this scheme risks erosion of that special character. It requires substantial harm to the stately Debenhams building, a non-designated heritage asset. The scheme falls short of the quality that Bristol deserves. Quite simply, the proposal should be better. Better in terms of design excellence, a better response to character. It is achievable, and it's what the city deserves.
Simon, could I call you? Thanks. Richard Davell. Richard.
Good afternoon. I'm reading this on behalf of Richard. This is not an architect on a human scale or responsive to human needs. The effect will be overbearing and oppressive. For pedestrians on Horsefair, it will be like walking through a canyon. Residents on the lower floors of the 28-storey block will also feel disadvantaged and overwhelmed. I agree with the comments by Historic England that the recreation of a medieval precinct in Bars Court makes no sense in this context. At present, a person approaching the former Debenhams via Merchant Street sees monumental architecture, broad pedestrian space and people waiting at a bus stop. Some may be sheltering from rain under the building frontage, playing music or preaching. Can the existing building not be adapted in a way that accommodates rather than destroys the present street scene? Bristol does not need another neo-brutalist statement in concrete towering over the dispossessed. Thank you.
Stephen Wickham. Stephen.
Thank you. Bristol's Conservation Advisory Panel objects in the strongest terms to this development. Its grossly excessive scale and massing would cause significant harm to the city's historic core. Its dominance would adversely impact not only the setting of the nearby significant heritage assets, but also impact long-distance views across the city from Castle Park and multiple nearby conservation areas. National planning policy requires high-quality, beautiful and sustainable buildings. This development is destructive of any sense of human scale and the antithesis of that aspiration. The presumption clause, para 11D1, does not apply to heritage assets and conservation areas. The panel endorses the view of the 20th Century Society that the existing landmark building with its impressive and sophisticated 5-storey stone-faced facade should be identified as a non-designated heritage asset in recognition of its clear historic significance and its architectural and townscape merit. It should be refurbished and repurposed, thus avoiding the carbon cost of demolition and reconstruction. Thank you.
Thanks, Stephen. Kim Hicks.
I am full of admiration for all of you having to wade through all the paperwork, the mass of it that you have to absorb before making decisions under such pressurised conditions as I've witnessed at previous meetings. Regarding this site, Bristol needs housing, but not like this. Broadmead offers a great opportunity, but it should be looked to as a whole. You should be creating an inspiring central area, a flagship development for other cities to aspire to. It should not be piecemeal developments as we're seeing at the moment. Imagine mid and low-rise places for people to live, close to the park and the river, not overlooking a busy road with the awful associated air quality. Please stop the rot of these mountainous high-rises. Remember, you were elected to represent the views of your constituents, and with May in mind, this might be your last opportunity to do the right thing. Don't allow desperate people wanting a home to end up in something that is just better than nothing. Offer them something designed with quality of life at its top priority. Look at the proposal yourself and ask yourself, could you, but would you want to live in that building?
Thanks, Skin. Rob Harding.
St James Priory Project strongly objects to the planning application for the redevelopment of the Debenhams site. Our principal concern is the negative impact the proposed development will have on the setting of the Grade 1 listed church and Grade 2 style listed church house, which are in our care. The proposed new development is overbearing and will completely dominate these buildings. Your planning policies talk about the need to protect key views and that the height, scale and massing of development should be appropriate to the immediate context. The development does not even attempt to meet these criteria. Indeed, it is difficult for us at least to understand why the Council has such policies when it has so little regard to them. The Council is developing a comprehensive strategy for Broadmead. Current applications should conform to existing planning policies until the Council adopts a new approach to development. Lastly, improvements to the public realm could be achieved with a much more modest scheme, one which respected neighbouring properties and complemented rather than dominated this part of Broadmead. We urge committee to reject this application.
Thank you. Can I thank all members of the public who have submitted submissions? Can we move to the case officer now who will deal with the presentation? Conrad, it'll be note that I've actually, your tyrant of adjournments reverted to the standard 5-minute officer timeline. So I'm afraid if you could focus your comments in that time.
Thank you. Okay, so we come to Debenhams, Bristol. The proposal is for the demolition of the existing buildings and the erection of a mixed-use development comprising of residential and commercial floor space, together with amenity space, landscaping, public realm works, vehicle access and servicing arrangements. So the reason it's come for committee referral, to date there have been 111 objections and 17 letters of support. The main focus of the objections are around design, including the excessive height and negative impact on the skyline, impact on wider heritage assets dominating over historic landmarks. Concerns are being raised about the loss of the existing building, also lack of on-site parking, concerns about the amenity of future occupiers, concerns raising impact of the tenure, resulting in lack of proper family dwellings, and suggestions have been made to provide more than the policy-compliant 20% affordable housing. We've had objections from Historic England, objecting on harm to the setting of heritage assets and suggestion that a north-south route connected through the Bear Pit should be included. Civic Society have also objected, and so the 20th Century and Bristol City Council Heritage and Conservation also have raised objections. So here's a site location plan. In the red line, you can see the existing building with the 2 service yards to the east and west. You've got the existing site layout and the proposed site layout. You can see the proposal aims to split the site through the middle to create a pedestrian link, reinstating Bar Street. See the proposed ground floor plan. Ground floor will be dominated by commercial uses fronting the public realm. And there's the proposed first floor plan. You can see the pedestrian route through the site, linking the Horsefair to the St James Barton roundabout. You can see the proposed south elevations from the Horsefair, proposed north elevations from the St James Barton roundabout. And you've got an elevation view through a section through the middle of the site from Bar Street, a proposed section through the east elevations and also through the west and from the south. You've got some design iterations here of how the scheme's progressed in terms of detailing, particularly to the top of the building. Here's an example of some of the proposed roof gardens which will form private amenity space for residents. And you've got the public realm here on Bar Street, which will have options of steps or gentle 1 to 20 slope that will be pedestrian friendly. So in terms of design quality, it's a 10-year blind design. All units exceed national described space standards. Dual aspects being maximised. Only 9% of the units are single aspect. It exceeds the urban living SBD in terms of amenity space requirements. All units will be provided with a balcony or balconette. So a view from Merchant Street, continuing on to Bar Street, and then here's a view from the Horsefair. You can see the detailing on the corner with the round edge and the depth around the surround of the windows, and you can also see the utilisation of the public space by potential commercial occupiers. It's a view from St James Barton, and that's a pedestrian view there. So in terms of heritage and the existing building, it's a non-designated heritage asset, and in terms of the loss of the building, the harm has been weighed against the benefits of the scheme in accordance with the NPPF. In terms of the impact on the wider heritage assets, an exercise has been undertaken by the Council and Heritage England, and the conclusion is it will lead to less than substantial harm to the identified heritage assets. So in terms of the test, it would be weighed against the balance against the public benefits in accordance with the NPPF to provide clear and convincing justification. So in terms of the planning balance, obviously we've covered the fact that there'll be less than significant harm to identified heritage assets. There'll be a loss of an existing building, which is a non-designated heritage asset. However, officers consider that the material considerations in this case weigh in favour of the proposal, namely the regeneration of a brownfield site, an introduction of a new pedestrian route in line with the city's draft development plan for the city centre, creation of new public open space for Broadmead, which is 29% of the site area, 502 new dwellings in the city centre and the location meeting nationally described space standards, 20% compliant affordable housing, the provision of flexible retail, vast economic benefits, 2 million in SIL, 1.8 million new homes bonus, and also additional jobs. So there's a positivity in net gain, 100% in terms of creation of new habitats, and also in terms of sustainability, it's BREEAM excellent, and it will be connected to the district heat network. So we come to the recommendation. Officers agree in favour of the proposal in line with the development plan, and we recommend approval subject to conditions and a 106 agreement and a TRO 278 highway agreement. Thank you. I'm able to answer questions.
Thank you, Conrad. You slightly exceeded the time by 2 minutes, but if I'm still chairman after May, I'll actually take it off your next presentation. Right, questions? No? Paul.
The first, thank you, sorry. The first one, it's about the, I'm always really concerned about livability, and, you said all flats have got balconies or Juliet balconies. How many of them are actually Juliet balconies? Because looking at it, it does seem like a lot of them. And I don't think a Juliet balcony is a balcony. It's not, it is a Juliet balcony, but it's not private outdoor space. So that's my first question. Another question I have is about the commercial use downstairs. It says on the report, to the best of my recollection, that 10% is going to be affordable workspace. I wonder, can we do anything about that? That doesn't seem that doesn't seem quite enough for me. I mean, I think if we're developing the city centre in the way that we want to develop it, we would want to have more than 10% affordable space for creative industries and startups and Bristolians to get off their feet. So is there anything that we can do about, making that a higher figure? I've got another question about the gradient of Bar Street. I don't know what that actual gradient could be. I mean, I'm sure there must be a way of measuring it. I'm very concerned about the street in general. I think that we're being persuaded that we're opening up a lovely new boulevard that's going to have access east to west, but actually what we might be doing is just opening a wind tunnel that's very steep and that people will not be able to access. When you look at it carefully, that sort of sweepy around thing does make it look like it's very steep. And my fourth thing is that I really want us now all to look at the verified views, because if we could share them, I think they are quite astonishing. You just need to look at them and look at what it's going to do to that area, especially around the bear pit. I mean, you just look at it and there's a huge amount of concrete, and they don't even with the verified views, they don't go all the way up to the top. So I think I'd like to have the 3 questions answered, and if you will permit me, I think all of our committee today should really look at those verified views. I mean, I'll go further and say that in a recent application, which I felt I was able to support, the two things...
Paula, you're straying actually into
I knew you were going to stop me. That's fine. I've asked 4 questions.
I'll leave the case officer to respond, but I have to say, full well, the purpose of this committee is not to redesign an application in committee. We can change conditions, all that sort of thing. But that's not that we have to judge the scheme in front of us.
I think I'm just trying to drill down into some information. That's all I'm trying to do, Chair.
Conrad?
Thank you, Chair. So, in terms of the balconies question, I think something like 45% of the properties will have a proper balcony. There'll be others with a Juliet balcony, but we tried to implement an actual proper balcony where possible in terms of the orientation of the design. So it's been included where we can to have a balcony in line with sort of SPD guidance and the urban living SPD guidance.
What percentage have space?
So in terms of private outdoor space, 46% have an external balcony or balconette where not possible. Obviously, there is availability of outdoor space for everybody beyond the private amount, which exceeds sort of the amount that would be expected in the urban living SPD by over 100%.
So can I just, for clarification, you say 45% or 46% have private balconies or Juliet? So that's the total altogether. It's the Juliets and the balconies, or?
That's correct. Yeah, but the majority have a private balcony. However, you've got the communal outdoor space that is available for the residents.
Yeah.
For the wider scheme, which if you calculate all the proposed outdoor space, so if you include the space on the balconies, the private space, and the communal outdoor space, it exceeds by over 100% of what would be expected in the urban living SPD. So obviously there's a creation of a lot of open space here that would be available to residents. You've also got other facilities internally, such as gyms, amenity areas within the buildings that would add to that. And then obviously there's the opportunity to use the space on Bar Street as well, which is open to the general public.
John.
So I had other questions, and can we look at the pictures?
Shall we go to the gradient one now?
Yeah.
While we try and get some views if possible. And Pip's going to talk about the gradient of Bar Street. I'm going to hand over to Pip now.
We've worked very hard with the developer on this because it was a very constrained space, but they went back and redesigned to make sure all the movement from Horsefair up to James Barton would be DDA compliant, and that's what we have to judge it on. So disability access is done. So we did go back and they did redesign the ground first floor movement there. So that would be able to be used, and mostly that's undercover, so it would be actually quite a pleasant movement on there. But we also will be using the existing for them to access things like Amazon deliveries coming down the slope that's by Bar Street. So we believe that we've worked with the developer to get the best option possible for that, but I can say that they have made it DDA compliant, which means the gradient will be correct to that standard, which is what we have to do at this stage. And detailed design, which will be conditioned, will require more thorough testing of that.
Shall I, while Conrad gets up the views? I think that your second question was about the affordable workspace. Did I catch that correctly?
No, I had another question about I think I may have got this wrong, but I felt that there was some questioning about microclimates on the roof terraces, and that there was an issue about wind and creating very sort of windy wind tunnel areas. So I'd like to have a bit more detail about that. And just for my own benefit, I think maybe I've lost the plot. Did you say that there was only 9% are single aspect? Because I thought in the report 40%.
Yeah, so in terms of single aspect units, only 9% are single aspect of all the units. In terms of the sort of wind issues, are you mainly referring to the wind issues on the sort of private sort of yeah? So that's been carefully considered in the design, and obviously there's been some sort of assessment of that in terms of the impact of wind on those spaces. We've been working on it to mitigate any impacts by various structures that will be conditioned. At this stage, we've got like a sort of a wider general plan. However, the finer details and the impact of the wind will proceed in the conditions that we've added on for the finer details. So we'll be looking at the actual physical structures that will be going there, and SIC Design Group are obviously identified the issue of a potential wind impact here, and we feel that a scheme can be delivered with minimal impact to those residents, so they can enjoy those areas without disruption from wind.
Can I just clarify, it's 9% single aspect north facing or sort of northwest facing, 46% are dual aspect, but certainly, again, this was an area that officers have worked really hard with the developers and are content with where we've arrived at, that is indeed the best possible option, given all the constraints on this site.
I understand that, but I just wanted to get the facts correct. So 9% single aspect north facing, but about 40%, I think it was, single aspect.
No, 46% dual aspect.
Oh, yes, so 54% single aspect. Thank you. Can we see the images?
Yeah, I'm just trying to. I've got some up now. I'm just trying to get them onto this screen. It's the trouble. So let me see if I can change the permissions on here. Duplicate the displays might help. Right, hopefully this works. Obviously, yeah, right, here we go. So we've got many sort of viewpoints here. I mean, this is the list here. We've got 100 figures. I mean, it's something that is being uploaded as part of the submission. You've got them mapped out here, some of them. these are like the existing views and the proposed. I mean, obviously we've spent a lot of time considering the impact on wider viewpoints. I mean, this is all sort of been uploaded. So, I mean, I don't think I can go through all of them, but I mean, specifically, what would we want to see shown today before members?
I'm sorry if I'm being troublesome, but I mean, I'm looking at one now which is taken from, you know, that piazza where the Metro Bank is in Broadmead. And, you know, I think if everybody could see that, you could see that this hugely dominates the space. And it's going to be very oppressive. And I really wanted us to see all of those.
I mean,
which page?
Could I suggest actually join the debate if Paul has encouraged you to do so? So look it up, please. John.
Thank you, Chairman, and thank you for the report.
Paula, could you turn off your mic, please?
Thank you.
I have a question over the economic benefit, which is quite a big factor for me in weighing up the pros and cons, and was in the pack that the developer put together. And in particular, Broadmead retailers to benefit from increased spending of £11 million a year. Can I ask, is there some kind of standard calculation that's used to work that out? Because I'm struggling to see, divided by 500 people spending about £2,000 a month of their income with Broadmead retailers. So I'm obviously missing some added benefit that comes as part of it.
yeah, so I can't verify the calculations. As far as I'm aware, those economic benefits have come from the agents and developers. So they're estimations. So we need to consider them sort of with a pinch of salt. But obviously they're an indication of what could be possible. But clearly, obviously, there would be an impact economically on the existing retail and the proposed, given adding sort of 502 dwellings in this site in the middle of Broadmead.
Because it was in the report, but there's no independent only because I'm trying to understand if anyone that lives in Broadmead spends £2,000 a month with Broadmead retailers.
Yes, sorry.
I would add, it doesn't have to be all from the people living there. Clearly, a scheme like this will massively improve the vibrancy of the city centre and massively increase the footfall of people visiting who otherwise would not be visiting. And I think that is what underlies these calculations.
Tom.
Thank you. Yes, my first question was one about what consideration, if any, we have to give to the recently consented scheme at the Premier Inn site, because obviously that's itself a very tall building. And one of the questions I was trying to picture in my mind was the effect of shadowing and, you know, wind tunnelling that those two proposals might have when combined together. So if you could touch on that, please, and following on from that, just outline the width of the newly created street, because from those visual impact assessments that Paula was saying, it doesn't look hugely wide, and I'm again concerned about wind tunnelling and you know, the possible impact of that.
So there's been a cumulative impact assessment that's considered the impact of this proposal and the approved Premier Inn site. So it's combined them together and assessed various areas such as wind, visual impact on the cityscape, impact on sunlight, impact on neighbour amenity, and generally speaking, there isn't an objection to the combined cumulative impact of both developments. In some ways, this proposal would screen views from the Premier Inn from the south, for example, So there's some benefits there, but generally the cumulative impact is not considered unacceptable combined. Now, obviously, you asked about the width of Bar Street. I think it's around 18 metres, 18.6 metres. It varies at points, but it's around 80 metres. There have been sort of wind assessments to see the impact of that. Obviously, there's a lot of landscaping proposed, which would mitigate the impact of wind tunnelling. So generally, we haven't got any concerns that have been raised in terms of impact on the use of that site, the public realm.
Can I suggest we actually move to the debate now? Obviously, members will recall that very often we hear people arguing against a scheme and saying, a better scheme could be created for this site, of course. In my opinion, and I appreciate beauty is in the eye of the beholder, but this is a good and positive scheme deserving of our support. Frankly, even before the COVID pandemic, the shape of retail in Broadmead, in Britain, was changing. There's no doubt about it. Moreover, their space needs to be given over to productive housing need. The fact we're getting over 500 units in this scheme, including 20% affordable housing, and still having 10% commercial employment space mainly on the corners of the scheme, is really positive. I also like the fact we're removing a building which, frankly, which has been stated, has no intrinsic real benefit, historic benefit, of course, and which blocks the site. We're actually opening that up, creating 30% public realm, which is positive, and recreating a medieval street scene, which is very substantially wide. All that's positive to me. I also say perhaps I'm viewed as a Johnny-come-lately to Bristol, because members of my family have only been here since the Reformation. But I'm getting a bit irritated by people lecturing us that we shouldn't regenerate because of some alleged negative impact on so-called heritage assets. Frankly, I don't believe any heritage asset is affected in a significant or negative way here, so I'll be voting for this scheme. John?
Yeah, looking at it, I like it halfway up, and then it kind of gets everything else looks great. But and I'd like to have placed more weight on my decision on the economic benefit, but I just don't believe the £11 million a year. What I do like, though, is that this isn't student accommodation for once, and that it's going to contribute money to the local economy through council tax and other things. And I don't doubt there will be some kind of economic benefit to the city, if only to provide people with opportunities of housing. So on that basis, I will be voting for it.
Thank you, Fee.
Yeah, John seems to be speaking my mind quite a lot today, but there we go. Again, from the waist down, it's not too bad. It's I find actually bits of the curved corner and so forth quite appealing. I'm not convinced by this medieval street scene we appear to be recreating. Again, I have concerns about the wind tunnelling, but overall, and again, something that John said in one of our previous meetings was this argument about accepting all development because of the affordable housing and because we need housing. That argument is starting to wear a bit thin, because I genuinely do not believe that the quality or the look of this building is good enough. I just think it's incredibly dominating, especially in conjunction with the Premier Inn. 2 28-storey buildings right on Stokes Croft. No, I'm sorry, so I'm voting against that.
Do I say someone? Tom?
Yeah, thanks. I think I'll do a bit of repeating of what other people have said, really. I think I welcome the inclusion of the affordable retail space, though I take the point really we should be seeking more of that. And I actually welcome the reopening of the street. I think that's a nice addition, but I think it would be totally unimaginable to the people when that street was last there to be looking up at those the looming towers and the big canyon that have been created. And it's not clear to me from the report that the living conditions of the future residents are particularly brilliant either. You know, Juliet balconies and a small bit of amenity space 28 stories up is not the sort of, you know, exceptional quality we should be demanding for this site, as well as the height, scale, massing. It looks like a, you know, particularly bland design. So I can't bring myself to vote for it on the grounds of you know, a few affordable units alone.
Tim?
Yeah, it'll probably be a bit controversial here, but, you know, I've lived in Bristol a very long time, and to me the city centre has always been an exceedingly ugly place. And I've looked at the views that Paul is talking about. I do have concerns that the building is higher than you'd like it to be, but most of those views don't, to me, take it from a beautiful looking city to an ugly one. So from the visual impact side of things, I'm not too worried. What I do remember is that we've been talking for as long as I can remember. We've been talking about having people living in the centre of our cities because they do it so well in Europe, and it's kept their cities alive. And our city, all over Britain, we've done the opposite, and we've moved people out of our cities in a lot of places. So, you know, I'm very much in favour of bringing people back into living in the centre and helping to regenerate it.
Chris?
Yeah, a lot of what Tim said, I agree with. We need people back in the city, and I do believe, as John said, that there will be a regeneration there. The Broadmead at the moment is falling on its feet. I think there will be a lot of people will go in there. I do like the look of that zigzag up and down for, and I think it was 20%, was it maximum? No, 1 in 20, which is amazing, really, because I like some of the psychopaths to be like that, to be honest. But we're bringing in people to the city centre. The economy will improve. We're also getting council tax out of these. Like you said, it's not student accommodation again. I think there's bits of it I don't like, but 95% I think is excellent, and I will definitely be voting for it.
Paula?
Well, in response to Tim, yes, in European cities they do it really, really well. And how do they do that? They bring people into blocks of flats that are about 10 or 12 stories high. And that's where that's a human level of living. And I just don't think that, you know, putting people into 28-story blocks with very little private or public amenity, I think this, I mean, I am getting a bit weary of the medieval street that's being opened up again, because, I mean, 18 metres, I don't even know if that's as wide as this chamber. And you're going to pack in all of that, you know, all the landscaping and all the public realm into that. I just think it's hugely dominant. And, you know, if you look at the other views of the city where it is going to be injurious and damaging, I just don't think it all stacks up. Obviously I want to regenerate that area as well. And it's with great reluctance that I would be coming to the decision. I wanted to be able to support it, but I can't.
I'll take Andrew, then Tom, and then I'll test the mood of the members.
Thank you, Chairman. Yeah, I find myself in a similar place to last month when we were looking at the Premier Inn application, and I really wasn't sure. You know, normally you come to a meeting, you've got some kind of idea how you think it's going to go, but you know, as Councillor Jackson mentioned earlier, there are always pros and cons to every application we have before us, and it's up to us to weigh and balance and come to a decision. You know, this scheme does have clear benefits, as highlighted in the officer's report. Housing provision, very important, and as Councillor Rippington said, we need to bring people back into our city centres, to live in our city centres, to animate those city centres, not just during the daytime, 9 to 5, Monday to Friday, but in the evening as well, weekends. We've got to have people in our city centres, keeping our city centres alive. Broadmead is basically dying on its feet. We've got to kind of start the rejuvenation, and I think this scheme is part of that rejuvenation. I do like the public realm. I know people have been a bit dismissive of that, but I think the improvement of public realm is really crucial, and making attractive places that people want to visit and want to hang around in. So I think, yes, there are drawbacks. Of course, there are going to be impacts on heritage assets, but they've been assessed as less than substantial harm. It is a very high building, and I'm not a huge fan of high buildings, but I think they do work well in a cluster. We do have the Premier Inn site coming forward. I think this site will be part of a cluster of taller buildings that I think will work quite well in the city centre. I know it's not everyone's cup of tea, but we are delivering 500 housing units. I think that is the key as well, isn't it? So on balance, I will be supporting this development.
Thank you, Andrew. Tom, bearing in mind it's your second time, could I urge you to be quite brief if that's possible?
Well, I was actually going to suggest, Chair, that we should extend the debate, given that there seems to be, a bit of uncertainty amongst us here, because, I could potentially be persuaded the other way. I think the main thing for me, as we've sort of covered before, is that it doesn't seem to respond to the context. It seems way too high. Some of those visual amenity, visual impact assessments, looking down that corridor towards the newly opened street, it's got these two huge towers on either side of it, and it just looks like a big canyon. But I do agree with people that have said, that we should be trying to redevelop this site and that we should be introducing housing into it. So I'm a little bit torn, and I'd be willing to hear another round of speeches if you'd consider
no. Councillor Rippington did admit to me if we hadn't removed plot 1 Bedford Green from the agenda, he might be asleep by that time. Anyway, I'm going to move we grant the application with conditions. Do I have a seconder, please? Chris, thank you. Can I do a name vote? I'll vote for. Chris?
For.
Philippa?
For.
Tim?
4.
Andrew?
4.
John?
4.
Tom?
Against.
Fee?
Against.
And Paula?
Against.
Then that's overwhelmingly passed. Can I thank you for your attendance? It hasn't been quite as arduous as before. Those I've already mentioned, those who are retiring, those of you who are standing for re-election, can I wish you good luck, and hopefully we'll see those of us who survive after next Thursday. And we finished in good time, so those of you who want to rush off canvassing, you can do so. Thank you.